3 unsettling forest hiking and camping. Horror Stories 1. The disappearing campsite. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend getaway. Just me, my best friend Jason, and the untouched wilderness of the northern woods. We had planned this trip for weeks, mapping out a secluded spot by a quiet lake, miles away from civilization. The thought of being alone in nature, away from the chaos of our daily lives, was something we both craved. We arrived just before sunset, the sky painted in hues of deep orange and purple. Setting up camp was quick. We pitched our tent, collected firewood, and settled down with beers in hand as the fire crackled. There was an unnatural stillness in the air, but we brushed it off as exhaustion from the hike. That night I woke up to a distant rustling outside. At first I assumed it was a raccoon rummaging through our supplies, but the sounds were deliberate, heavy. Footsteps, slow and precise. I nudged Jason awake, whispering for him to listen. The steps circled the tent, crunching on fallen leaves. My heart pounded. We both sat frozen in silence, gripping the small hunting knife we'd brought for safety. Then it stopped. Minutes passed, but we heard nothing. Jason, braver than I, unzipped the tent slightly and peeked outside. I held my breath, expecting to see a large animal or maybe another hiker. But there was nothing. Just the trees, the lake shimmering under the moonlight, in the eerie quiet of the forest. We barely slept that night. When the sun finally rose, we stepped outside, looking for signs of tracks. That's when we noticed something that sent chills through our bones. Our footprints were there, leading from the trail to our tent. But there were no other tracks around us. Nothing had circled us. No prints in the dirt. No evidence of an animal or a person. Yet we had both heard it. Something had been out there, watching. We left that morning without saying much. The forest had a way of making you feel small, insignificant. But that night, it had made us feel like prey. 2. The vanishing stranger I had been hiking for years, often alone, seeking the solace that only the deep woods could provide. I had never feared the wilderness until that day. The trail was unfamiliar, winding through dense forest, the kind where the canopy was so thick that only slivers of sunlight pierced through. It was mid-afternoon when I first saw him, a man sitting on a fallen tree a few feet off the path. His posture was hunched, head low, his face hidden beneath a dark hood. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there. I gave him a polite nod as I passed, but he didn't respond. My instincts told me to keep moving, so I did. But as I continued, something felt wrong. I kept glancing back, expecting to see the man still sitting there. But he wasn't. He hadn't passed me, and there was no sound of footsteps behind me. He had just vanished. A cold dread settled over me. I quickened my pace, my mind racing through explanations. Maybe he had just moved deeper into the woods. Maybe I had imagined him. An hour later, I arrived at the clearing where I planned to rest. I set my pack down, took a drink of water, and then froze. He was there, standing at the edge of the clearing, still as stone, his head tilted slightly as if studying me. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't heard him approach, hadn't seen him on the way. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. I grabbed my bag, turned, and walked briskly back toward the main trail. I didn't dare look back, even when I heard the faint rustling of movement behind me. By the time I reached my car, the sun had nearly set. I locked the doors, my hands shaking as I started the engine. As I pulled away, my headlights illuminated the tree line. And there he was, watching. I never hiked that trail again. 3. The unseen campfire. I had always been skeptical of the supernatural. That was until I camped alone in Black Hollow Forest. It was a well-known but lightly trafficked area, perfect for solo trips where I could unwind. I arrived in the early evening, choosing a spot near a shallow creek. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and as the night fell, I settled by the flames with a book in hand. Hours passed, and the fire dwindled into embers. The quiet of the forest was peaceful, almost hypnotic. Then in the distance I saw it, another fire. It was faint, barely flickering through the trees. I hadn't passed anyone else on the way in, and I was at least 5 miles from the nearest campsite. A knot formed in my stomach. Was someone else out here, I stood up, peering through the trees, trying to get a better look. There was no sound, no movement, just the glow of an unseen campfire. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and took a few steps forward, my boots crunching softly against the forest floor. But as soon as my light hit the spot where the fire should have been, there was nothing. No fire, no people, no trace of anyone ever being there. A chill ran down my spine. I turned back towards my campsite, suddenly feeling exposed, vulnerable. The woods had become oppressive, the darkness deeper than before. I decided to leave. Packing up in record time, I started back toward my car. Every so often, I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see that phantom fire reappear. But the only thing I saw was darkness. And in the silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me all along. I wondered from time to time about what it is that was watching me the whole time I was in the forest camping. I wish I could find out if anyone else had gone through the same experiences I had. Now I listen closely to people's stories about the strange and unusual. I am still a bit of a skeptic, though I can say I am slightly more open-minded. I've heard so many tales about other strange occurrences in the woods, some that have made the hair on my neck rise. I am thinking of documenting some of these stories I have heard, perhaps just as a little precaution to others. I still go camping, but I do it as part of a larger group of people. I am yet to tell anyone what I experienced. This is my way of telling others without the skepticism of friends and family and people I know, thinking that I had imagined things. I know what I had experienced. It stays with me as a warning even when camping with a group of people. I now pay attention to that inner voice, that sixth sense I believe that we all come with as part of our survival skills. A friend of mine has a story to tell. I've encouraged her to submit her story here and tell her story without fear or judgment. I believe it will help her. She was unsure of mentioning it to me, but I told her she needs to let her story be known in a way that feels comfortable to her. I think she is building up the courage to tell her story very soon. I am happy that I came away from my experience without any harm coming to me. From what I have heard, not everyone has been that lucky. There have been a few unexplained disappearances in woodlands and forests. I used to blame lack of preparedness and perhaps the person simply wanting to disappear from family and friends, using camping in the woods as an excuse to set their plans in motions. Perhaps I have been too hasty in thinking that way. I hope more people like my friend will come forward with their stories. If your gut feeling and instincts tell you to leave, then leave. I don't often feel that way. I have never experienced anything like what I experienced that night, before and after. And like I said, I now camp with a group of people. It has made me a lot more cautious, and I realize that there are things that I just cannot explain.